Hi, welcome aboard. One of the aspects of leisure that we've covered in recent years on Wilga boats has been flying, partly because of my ongoing interest in flying, a lifelong interest, and partly because the advent of aircraft such as this, ultralights, has brought flying within the reach of a huge number of people around the world who otherwise would not be able to fly. And every week, hundreds and hundreds of hours are flown in Australia alone in these little aircraft by people who really do enjoy themselves. And in spite of all of the bad press and publicity and the hype that you hear, they are one of the safest forms of flying available. Now, ultralights progressed, as did normal general aviation aircraft, through a whole series of generations. This one, which I built in about 1979-1980, I regard as being a second generation ultralight. It flew for about 7 years and about 800 hours with no problems whatsoever. I flew at some quite long distances up and down the east coast of Australia, and I retired it about 18 months ago in order to do a full rebuild, which is almost finished, and we'll be flying in it again. But it's second generation. It's not quite as minimum as the first generation were, which almost were flying lawn furniture, if you like. It's a little more sophisticated, particularly in its power unit, which will be bolted on this afternoon, but it's made out of aluminium tube, and what is there is all you need to go flying safely and be able to do it reliably for a long time. Now, there are third and fourth generation ultralights, and we saw a fourth generation a couple of weeks ago in the form of the Lightwing, which is designed and built in Ballina. A third generation, which is similar to this but a little more sophisticated, and a two-seater, is the Drifter, which is an American design which has been refined and modified for Australian conditions and is built by Ausflight at Boona in southeast Queensland. Now, the Drifter is an absolutely superb aircraft. Its performance with two people aboard is similar to the performance of this with one aboard. And it's brought, as I said, flying into the reach of a whole lot of people, particularly in the training mode. Now, Ausflight are very active in marketing the Drifter and also in flight training at Boona, and Drifters are used by flying schools all around the country. So let's revisit one of the highlights of 1989 and go flying once again in the Drifter with Ausflight. Wilga. About 20 years ago, an American named Klaus Hill designed and built a little ultralight aircraft called the Hummer. Now, the Hummer was most unusual in that it had what's called a parasol wing. The pilot sat right out in front of the aircraft on a long aluminium boom, and the propeller and engine were mounted right down the aft end of the fuselage with a V-tail. Now, that basic design was developed a few years later into the original Drifter. There are something like 3,000 Drifters flying around America, which have been extremely successful. In fact, one of the most successful of a huge number of ultralights which came on the market, were designed, developed and marketed in the early days of ultralight flying. That number has been narrowed down quite substantially in the intervening years, but the Drifter has prevailed all the way through. Now, about 6 years ago, Ausflight Aviation secured the Australian agency for the Drifter, but when the then Department of Aviation brought down its rulings for airworthiness standards and structural standards for ultralight aircraft, it was found that the American version didn't comply. So Ausflight embarked on a fairly lengthy and extremely expensive, in fact about $100,000 worth, of structural redesign of the aircraft so that it conformed not only to Australian standards but to world standards, to British standards, which are the highest in the world. So the aircraft is certified to Australian and world standards and can therefore be registered and insured and enjoys all of the benefits of a normal standard category aircraft. Now, it has an empty weight of around about 200 kilos, a gross weight of 400 kilos, which obviously gives it, with its two seats, a payload of 200 kilos. It can carry two quite hefty people with enough fuel for significant range. It cruises at around about 60 knots and stalls at 28 knots. Now, again, that speed range from 28 to 60 knots, a speed range of 32 knots, is extremely useful in an ultralight aircraft. In fact, some of the earlier competitive designs had a speed range of something like 15 or 18 knots, which is one of the reasons that they fell by the wayside. Rate of climb is 1,000 feet a minute off the ground. Again, extremely useful, making the Drifter ideal for small field operation, rough field operation, and it climbs at that rate under the urge of its Rotax 503 46 horsepower two-stroke engine. Again, a world certified ultralight engine, even though it's a two-stroke. The prop is driven by a gear reduction, and as you can see, the motor is mounted behind the pilot under the trailing edge of the wing. It's a pusher type propeller configuration, which has great advantages in the efficiency, the overall efficiency of the wing, and also it keeps the noise away from the occupants. And flying a drifter, as I was doing with this yellow and black one that you see here, is really almost an eerie undertaking, because you're out in front of the aircraft, you're away from all the noise, you can't really see much of the structure apart from the fuselage pod and the windscreen in front of you, and you're effectively suspended in midair, which is quite a magnificent sensation when you're actually airborne, particularly if you're at reasonable altitude as we were here. The takeoff distance is 80 metres, again very short. The landing distance is the same, which means again, as I said, that the aircraft is capable of operating into and out of tight, rough fields. Now, drifters are used primarily for agricultural support operations. In fact, there are around about 400 of them flying in Australia. They're used for mustering, for which they're absolutely excellent. They can get down in amongst the trees. They're more than sufficiently manoeuvrable to handle extremely low-level operations. They have a tight turning radius. In fact, they're not certified for aerobatics, but the airframe is strong enough and efficient enough to handle relatively advanced aerobatics. In fact, there's an aerobatic version of it, of this aircraft, which is essentially the same, certified in America. So that means that you can turn tightly in and out the trees, you can pick up stray cattle and muster them back into the area in which you want them with almost the same degree of ease as a helicopter. Now, when you consider that this aircraft costs under $20,000 flyaway, and the cheapest helicopter you can buy costs about $145,000 flyaway, and when you ally that with the operating costs, which in the helicopter could be $200, $300 an hour, and in this aircraft is around about $18 to $20 an hour, you'll see why 400 of them are being operated in farm support and mustering duties around the country. Now, a couple of years ago, Ausflight relocated to Boona, and with the assistance of the Queensland Government set up a sporting aviation centre, which involves the building of the drifters and a fleet of drifters on the line as a flight training facility. They train quite a lot of pilots. In fact, quite a lot of the pilots whom they have trained over the last couple of years have gone on to become general aviation and even commercial pilots, using their experience in the drifter to great effect. The manufacturing facility uses some componentry which is subcontracted to various areas and facilities around Brisbane, but a lot of the manufacturing and all of the assembly is handled under supervision in the hangar at Boona there. So the aircraft roll out of the factory at a fairly high rate and are distributed all over the country. Now, a couple of years ago it became obvious to Ausflight that there was a need for an aircraft in the general rural utility category, which was a little heavier than the drifters. So they looked around the world and settled upon the Polish designed and built Wilga. This is quite a remarkable aircraft. In fact, this was the first time I'd seen a Wilga, although obviously I was aware that they were around. They were originally designed in 1963. There are around about 2,000 of them operating all over the world, particularly in underdeveloped countries in the general utility category. It's a 4-seat aircraft, and at first appearance it sort of has elements of a helicopter about it, a Mack truck and a dragonfly. The aircraft was obviously designed along the philosophy that form should fit function. It was designed to be used as what amounts to an aerial light truck, and that's really what it looks like. It's powered by a Polish license-built Lycoming 260 horsepower radial engine called an Ivchenko, and its performance certainly matches its remarkably tough construction and its short field ability. It has a cruise speed of 85 knots, a stall speed with its fully slotted wing of 32 knots, so you can fly around, put it on 2,000 revs, and you can fly around all day without having to worry about whether you're going to go too slow or not. Its initial rate of climb is 1,200 feet a minute, and it will carry a massive 400 kilos of payload. Its takeoff distance is 80 metres and it lands in 95 metres at its gross weight of 1,300 kilos. So if we've whetted your appetite and you feel like you'd like to try out the drifter, Boona is within easy access to northern New South Wales or southeast Queensland. Take a run out on the weekend and have an introductory trial flight in one of the aircraft. We'll be back right after this break.